I have the pleasure of introducing Mack Staples. He is the Senior Red Team Leader at Zenefits. Mack has 10 plus years of experience in web application security and is an expert and researcher in the field. Now, Zenefits has really written a solid playbook for how a bug bounty program should be run. We're super fortunate to have Mack with us, so he's got the first-hand knowledge of their tips and tricks. Really excited to hear from you, Mack. The floor is yours, and appreciate you being with us.
Hey, thank you so much, and everybody, thank you for attending. Good to see so many people in the audience and interested in this really cool and dynamic growing space. I actually got into the bug bounty space a couple of years ago, and basically just as a result of joining Zenefits, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But it has really kind of given me an interesting perspective. My background, again, is actually in the consulting world, less on the corporate security side and more on just sort of, getting paid to break things, which I always enjoyed. And moving in-house within the company and starting to work on bug bounties, both from the management side and from the researcher side, has absolutely been fascinating. So today we're going to present 4 main tips for you guys for building an excellent program. And these are tips that we've learned along the way, both great ideas that we had and implemented that panned out, and things that, to be honest, we kind of learned the hard way. So let's just jump right into it. So here's what we're looking at. We're, as I said, going to talk about 4 main tips. The first one here is really to plan for the best and expect the worst. Now, I know that this may seem a little obvious. It may seem like something that every security person knows, or at least has been exposed to. Obviously, I mean, we spend our days thinking in terms of risk, in terms of worst case scenarios, and we really do our best to prepare for those worst case outcomes by designing response plans, recovery actions, and really everything else that we need to do if things go totally off the rails. And while all of that is critical and valuable, prevention itself is, of course, a much better way to go. And this first tip really speaks directly to that. So as you guys in the audience are probably aware, the internet is a dangerous place. If that's news to you, welcome to the world of security. It is going to be a fun ride. Really, though, the internet is pretty dangerous. In this case, I'm talking specifically about how dangerous the internet is for web applications, mobile applications, IoT devices. I don't know if you guys saw the networked teddy bear that recently got hacked, and so on. Basically, there's a lot of bad things out there that can happen to these technologies. And at a dead minimum, there's entire botnets that are out there constantly and automatically scouring the internet. They've been built to find common issues like misconfigurations, missing best practices, default passwords, accidentally exposed data, and anything else that machines can easily find. More than that, though, there's actually people as well that may be targeting whatever services or products somebody connects to the internet. Now, back when I started at Zenefits, our company had a really good track record in terms of security. We had not had a data breach, and for the record, we still haven't. But the security program was young. It was much younger than the company itself. And so the security team had the challenge of really building this program and building security into the culture. That was pretty much our charter, as defined by our CISO at the time, was to kind of build that security culture within the company. And honestly, that was going to be a significant change. It was also going to be a bit of a challenge. And we knew that going in, and we're looking forward to it. And it was a fun ride. Now, obviously, being an HR company, which Zenefits is, in case you're not familiar with it, we have both personally identifiable information, PII, and protected health information, PHI, which are massive, massive targets right now. And our employees realized that with that sensitive data, we were likely to be a target online. What they didn't realize at the time, and what we were really there to communicate and help people realize, was how many things can go wrong as a company scales and as its offerings scale as well. And we scaled very, very quickly. We actually, for a couple of years, had the title of the fastest growing SaaS company in history, which was pretty epic, but it meant some very unique challenges. So one of the pieces that we ended up giving to our developers was to think like we had a huge target painted on our backs, and really think and act as if we were going to be hacked today. I mean, realistically, we were under constant attack, and that remains the case, as with most technologies online, but particularly something housing really sensitive data. Now, out of those conversations and the security training that we gave, various hackathons and the bug bounty bashes, which I'll touch on in a little bit, that we organized, we ended up working really, really closely with the engineering team. So to wrap this up again, plan for the best, but expect the worst, and communicate that out. Now, as a result of working with the engineering teams, I actually ended up learning something that I hadn't realized before, which brings us to our second point, which is the value of partnering closely with your engineering and development teams. So as background, I had some very, we'll say, interesting interactions with engineers and development teams in my previous life as a consultant. To be honest, developers were rarely happy to meet a security consultant. And to be fair, it did seem like we were there to break everything that they had worked hard to build, sometimes years worth of effort. By the time a consultant was done with their project and moved on to the next task, the next assignment, the next company, we typically left behind a lot of additional work for the engineering teams. Now, understandably, that could be pretty frustrating, and that was what I was encountering at the time. After I moved in-house and went to work for Zenefits, I actually found myself on the other side of the table. I was now working, as I said, very closely with our engineering teams, and I really learned how invaluable those teams are and how invaluable their involvement is in the entire process. By involving our development teams as early as possible within the security process, the security team was actually able to build a rapport and start socializing security, really doing what we could to make that message stick and really change the way that people thought about security and socialize security. As a result, we actually managed to make it part of the company culture. And while that was a good start, we actually pushed ourselves to do even better. To accomplish that, we decided that we really needed to be transparent. Now, okay, I apologize for any security people that freaked out at that statement. It's okay. I didn't mean to tell everyone everything. I don't think the legal department would enjoy that very much. What I mean by that is that we kept, obviously, the really sensitive stuff internal to the team and shared it out only as necessary. But we started sharing what we could with the engineers. And one of the best decisions that we made in that vein was to start discussing the trends that we were seeing in security. That meant trends in security generally and within our own company. As it turned out, one of the best sources that we found for information was our own bug bounty program. We did work with a couple of different vendors before ultimately settling on HackerOne for our platform, and honestly, we have not looked back at all. It's been an excellent ride. It's been a lot of fun, and I'll tell you guys in a few minutes some of the other things that we've come up with and some of the ways that we've made this fun and interesting. But anyway, by looking at the classes of issues that we were seeing reported, and actually, interestingly, the types of issues that we were not seeing, we were able to tease out our own strengths, weaknesses, and really communicate the trends that we were seeing. Now, to clarify a little bit about the types of issues that we were not seeing, because people always ask me questions about that, it's pretty obvious and pretty straightforward to take a look at the reports that you're getting, the classes of issues, and notice trends over time. You know, maybe you notice that a particular team is creating a whole lot of cross-site scripting issues, or they're commonly introducing SQL injection issues. Now, of course, that's kind of worst case scenario, and hopefully that's not actually what you're seeing. But it does give you valuable information. On the flip side, though, when we started looking at the items that we were not seeing, sometimes entire classes of issues, we noticed that there were certain protections that we were getting sort of by default, either because of the technology we were using or the framework that was in place, or even in some cases, the training that developers had received before or that we were delivering. That actually gave us a lot of food for thought, particularly around anything that wasn't related to developer training and expertise. Specifically, once we started shifting towards a microservices architecture, we really ended up kind of turning over the reins to the developers in terms of what technologies they wanted to use, whether that was to implement a framework, choose their, or not in some cases, choose their own servers that everything was running on, and so on. And if we were not seeing classes of issues as a result of those technologies, it meant that once those technologies were changed, or once developers started shifting to other stuff, we really needed to pay attention for those issues as well, because we may not actually be protected against them. We may have just found ourselves in a situation where we were not seeing those issues as a result of technology. So like I said, paying attention to both the trends that are reported, or the trends that you can see from the reports that you're receiving, and paying attention to the items that you're not seeing is invaluable. And then communicate that out with the engineering and development teams.
Hey, Mac, got a quick question if I can dive in. Just a really tactical one, actually. You mentioned the sharing with the engineers. Like, what's the mechanism for communication? Do you send that in an email? Like, how detailed is that? Do you have a regular sync? Is there one particular person you would send it to? Like, kind of how do you do that internally?
Oh, that is a great question. We actually have a few different mechanisms that we use. One is that within our internal tracking, issue tracking system, we actually created a project specifically for security issues. And the way that we built that was that it was as locked down as possible. But certain people did have access to it. Obviously, the CTO and development leads would have access to see the issues, particularly within their own business units. And then anytime that we saw an issue come in that was related to a specific product or a specific set of functionality, we would grant access to that particular ticket or report to the team that owned that functionality. So we would open it up where we needed to and share that information out. Now, moving from there, moving past the individual reports, we also, as I said, started paying attention to trends. And that was something that we did communicate to the larger development group as a whole. Occasionally there were emails if we had something that was particularly interesting, but other times it basically came down to the weekly developer meeting and spending some time just talking with the devs and showing them what we were seeing. Out of our program, we had some really cool live demos that we were able to give to our developers, and that was not only a lot of fun, but it was excellent to see kind of the realization when we were showing these issues, and would walk through the process of, this is what the researchers saw, they noticed this, started messing around, and eventually fine-tuned their attack, and they were able to pull this off. And seeing that spark and watching people look at that and the developers go, okay, that is awesome, was really, really rewarding. So
very cool.
The final mechanism, it was a lot of fun. The final mechanism that we used was actually to sit down with the individual teams, and we would do this initially once reports came in and once we had a sense of where a particular team was in terms of their security knowledge. And then later we started doing it earlier and earlier in the process. As I said, thanks to partnering with the engineering and development teams, we ended up getting involved in the process much earlier. Now that did take a little bit of time, but putting in the time early on to tell them about the issues and walk them through and show them what their particular team or pod was doing well, and of course what they maybe could improve on, was ultimately proved to be invaluable in terms of that knowledge sharing.
Great. Yeah, just that feedback loop, how valuable that is. Appreciate you kind of diving into the logistics there and how you guys tackle that. I'm really stoked for this next tip. This is one of my favorites, so take it away.
All right, will do. So tip number 3 here is all about recruiting and retaining hackers that understand your business and really are willing to invest the time to test your logic in particular. Now, I'll point out that this could be an even more broad tip. We could just say, tip number 3 is recruit and retain good hackers, or find hackers that are willing to put in the time. But this specifically calls out finding researchers that have the skills and the interest in your program to invest the time to test the business logic and test the parts of the app that are much harder or impossible for automated tools to test. That human element is really critical when it comes to testing and when it comes to finding the really complicated and unique and interesting vulnerabilities. So, as I mentioned before, our bug bounty program has proven to be an excellent source of information about our trends, strengths, and weaknesses. Now, as you might expect, it's also proven to be a spectacular resource for finding issues in our platform and mobile apps. I mean, that's sort of what you'd expect from a bug bounty program, right? I mean, there it is on the screen, hacker's gonna hack. Well, maybe. As it turns out, and this, I will admit, was something that I learned through trial and error, simply having a program really isn't enough, or may not always be enough. For anybody that hasn't been on the researcher side, the hackers that participate in bug bounty programs really have a lot of options when it comes to the programs they can participate in and targets they can hack on. They tend to be agnostic when it comes to the platform. So whether it's a HackerOne or another program that they could go and participate in, ultimately it really doesn't matter to them. It's the quality of the program and the engagement that keeps them coming back. Now, to be fair, HackerOne has done an amazing job in keeping our researchers engaged and helping us come up with some creative ways and coming up with some awesome stuff on their own that we'll talk about in just a moment. But since there are so many programs, the program really does have to be solid to attract and retain the best talent. So I'll discuss what it takes to run a good program in the next tip, but first I'm going to kind of talk about what the real value is of doing right by the researchers and running that quality program. And now, interestingly, this is something that I kind of learned while I was consulting as well, but it was really solidified as a result of going through this bug bounty process and building our own program. Basically, when I was consulting, there were certain projects where we'd have more time than others and really have a fair bit of time to get in, use the product that we were testing, get to know the assessment target. And in a lot of cases, in most cases, that made a huge difference in the quality of the results. By really understanding how the application worked, whether it was a web app, mobile app, or anything else, we were able to better understand it and dig deeper, go further with our testing, and ultimately find more issues. Now, bug bounty programs tend to follow that same rule, which is to say that the best results will come from repeated testing. And the best way, of course, to ensure that is to run a top-tier program that researchers will want to come back to. As I said before, researchers have a lot of options, and by making your program a more attractive program to them, you will get better results. Now, interestingly, to this day, we have researchers in our program that have gotten to know our web app almost better than we do. In fact, there's a couple that I'll go out on a limb here and say I think they may know the platform better than I do, which is actually kind of awesome. The knowledge that some of the researchers have built up is just absolutely spectacular. And the real benefit, of course, the downstream benefit is that by learning our platform inside and out, those researchers are able to find the very complicated and unique issues that other researchers, whether they're new to the program or just testing on a lot of different programs, kind of in an ad hoc way, may not be able to find. And those tend to be issues that automated tools simply cannot find. They just literally have no capacity to find those issues. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, this is where the testing the logic and testing those complicated issues comes in specifically. All right, so now what does it take to actually run a solid program that researchers keep coming back to? In this tip, we are going to cover exactly that, how to maintain a competitive and generous bug bounty program. So I'll start out with a little bit of an admission here. Our program is not perfect. In fact, I actually don't know any that are. Really though, a good program doesn't have to be perfect to attract and retain top talent. A good program, however, does need to be active. It does have to be fair, and it has to be consistent all the time. It also helps us to come up with creative ways to keep the researchers engaged, and that's part of what this tip is about as well. So first, and by the way, this is me speaking both as a bug bounty program manager and a bug hunter myself, communication is critically important to the ongoing success of a program. Keep in mind that bug hunting and bounty programs are a worldwide phenomenon, which means that, among other things, there will be language barriers. There will also be time zone differences and a number of other factors. So if you're running a program and you want it to be as successful as possible, you must take the time to make sure that your team understands that they need to work with the researchers to fully understand any issue that's reported. Let me put that a different way. Just because a report doesn't make sense at first glance, and that does happen, that doesn't mean that the issue that the researcher is describing is inaccurate. If you take the time to understand, take the time to work with the researchers, even work through any communication barriers or slow communication due to time zones or any of the other challenges that you'll face, your organization's security will be much, much better. The second piece of this is to keep the program flexible. There's a number of examples of programs that are flexible, and similarly, there are lots of examples of programs that are extremely strict about their rules. As I tell people, the program scope really, it isn't holy. I mean, it's, to quote from a movie here, there are more guidelines than actual rules. You know, I've actually seen a couple of programs that took such a hard line stance on their program and on their rules that they were basically writing threats into their program description. That honestly really didn't sit well with me. Some of the things that I've seen was like, I saw one program that said if the issue that you report isn't one of, you know, these 4 types of issues, your bounties will be forfeit and you'll be kicked out of the program. Like, that seems a little bit extreme to me. And in fact, there was another one that had a similar line and sort of made some veiled threats about maybe things could get even worse. You know, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a great idea to try to report your researchers or threaten to report your researchers if they, you know, step over an arbitrary line. But yeah, seriously, that was something that I actually saw, and I wish I was kidding about that. So not only do I not see the point in taking that sort of stance, I actually really, really, really strongly recommend against that. Zenefits does have a program scope in place, and, you know, of course, we ask our researchers to abide by that scope. We also limit, through that scope, we limit the servers and assets that they're willing to, or that they're able to test against and what we're willing to tolerate. But we're also willing to kind of bend the rules a little bit if somebody finds something major. Now, incidentally, I will share that has happened. On a couple of occasions, we've had bug hunters give us a heads up about some pretty significant issues that technically were outside of our scope. Now, if we had taken that same hard line, if we'd been super strict about our policies, those issues might have gone unnoticed, or maybe they would have been noticed and simply gone unreported, which would have been possibly a lot worse. My nightmare scenario here, my worst case, is that those issues are out there, we don't hear about them, and somebody that's not on our side, somebody that does not have our back, finds that issue, abuses it, and, you know, we end up as the next cloud bleed issue or something, you know, a hacked IoT teddy bear or, you know, whatever else. Like, that's pretty scary. All right, moving on to the third piece of this. A well-run program, in my opinion, will always take the time to answer questions and concerns from the researchers and explain the reasoning for decisions if asked. Now, that's a simple sentence, but there's a lot to it. In particular, the part about explaining the reasoning behind a particular decision, whether that's how a report is handled, what a bounty amount is or anything else. If you take the time to explain your thinking, the researchers will generally understand. I mean, put this a different way, these are some brilliant people, highly skilled people, and as long as you're consistent and explain your reasoning, they do tend to understand, or in some cases they may disagree and there's a discussion, but ultimately having that transparency has proven extremely valuable in our program. Now, of course, this may seem obvious, but believe me on this one, if researchers feel that a program is unfair, they will leave and go work on other programs, plain and simple. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of programs out there. If you want an idea of the programs that are out there and the wide variety of different types of programs, different tech, different sites that hackers can go play around on and break things on, HackerOne has an excellent directory where you can look up and see a list of public programs. Incidentally, we're not listed on there. We keep our program as sort of a private public program, which is to say we talk about it, but it's not open to the general public. But it is very interesting to go on and see all of the various companies that have programs. And keep in mind, again, those are all programs that researchers can go test on if they decide that a particular program isn't worth their time. And as a final piece to this, be creative. Personally, this is one of my favorite things about bug bounty programs, and something that HackerOne has done a great job fostering, particularly through some of the collaboration stuff that we've been able to do with them. So in particular, over the last 2 years, Zenefits has been involved with the HackerOne Bug Bounty Bash events. In case you haven't heard of these, the first two of these were held in Las Vegas and scheduled to happen right in the middle of DEF CON weekend. So immediately after Black Hat, we figured that pretty much if the best hackers in the world were all going to be in one place, all hanging out and playing with and breaking cool things, we wanted to invite them all over to try to hack us. And it was absolutely amazing. We also saw spectacular results. One of the other things that we did in terms of keeping it fun was that we actually made it a little more interesting and spiced up these events with some bounty multipliers that occurred randomly, as well as some special prizes for the first hacker to find a particular class of issue. That's really the big thing. Have fun with it. Keep it fresh. Keep it interesting. And not only will that help keep hackers engaged, but that'll also help keep it interesting for your team as you work through and manage your own program. So that covers the first 4 tips for building a world-class bug bounty program. If you guys want to start thinking up some questions you may have about those, again, please type them into the question box there on the side. And while you guys type up the questions, we'll touch really quickly on a couple of bonus tips here. All right, so the first bonus tip here is a little bit of a repeat, but it's worth going over again. Be loyal. Be loyal to your researchers and be loyal to your team. Remember, this entire process is a partnership between the researchers and your team. And ultimately, the quality of your researchers will determine how successful your program is. Plain and simple, if you can attract the best talent, you're going to get the best results. Put it another way, if you take care of them, they will take care of you. As I mentioned earlier, we've had times where we've had researchers contact us, occasionally out of band, so off of the HackerOne platform. Send us a text message or an email or something like that and give us a heads up about something that would not normally be in scope. In those cases, we had to make exceptions. We had to ignore scope. And in a few cases, we've thrown in some bonuses for some well and truly epic hacks. A little bit of more information is available about that in the HackerOne case study, which you guys should get a copy of, as well as this recording. And yeah, again, to sum that up, be loyal and keep your program dynamic. Second, celebrate the creative hack. really anybody can run an automated scanner. You know, you can easily, in 5 minutes, learn to fire up Nessus or Nmap or a burp scanner or whatever. And the results that come out of that really aren't anything unique. Given that, the really awesome hacks, the epic things that we see come from the creative minds of the hackers, and they come from the repeat testing that we talked about earlier. And in some cases, we see hackers building unique, new custom tools for testing all platforms, or in some cases for testing a specific platform. I know of a number of different researchers that have built tools specifically for testing Zenefits based on how we've architected our platform and our mobile apps. Recognizing these efforts really goes a long way. One of my favorite things to do actually is if somebody writes an excellent report that receives a submission, we'll throw a bonus on top of their bounty. And you know, for the most part, those bonuses tend to be pretty small, $25 to $50, say, or maybe a shirt, some swag, whatever we have or want to share with them. But really recognizing those creative hacks and showcasing them and showing them off, and really making sure that the researcher knows that we appreciate it, goes a long way to retaining that engagement. And finally, here we go with another movie quote, ABCs, always be closing. In this case, however, I'm talking about bug reports. An active, engaged program is critical, and only programs that maintain their momentum are going to survive. I've seen examples of that, again, both from the management side as well as from the bug hunter side. And I can't overstate the value of staying active in the program and keeping your researchers engaged as much as possible. So whether you're actually closing reports or just working them through the system, changing states, making sure the researchers know what's going on, it's important to stay active in the program.
Awesome, Mack. Appreciate you sharing all that. We do have a couple questions that have come in from folks on the line. And actually the first one kind of is in line with what one of my questions was. And I love your line that you say, scope isn't holy. And my question was kind of have you dive more into that. But we had a question come in that says, how does Zenefits go about defining the scope of their program? Do you recommend to go wide or narrow with your scope or attack surfaces out of the gates?
That is an excellent question, actually. The answer, I'm sorry to say, the answer is it depends, and I'll explain that. One of the things that we've heard repeated again and again, and this is actually a piece of advice from Lisa Wiswell, who helped make the Hack the DoD and Hack the Pentagon programs happen. And Lisa's advice was, don't start a bounty program unless you have the resources to fix what you find. That sort of speaks directly to this question, because the scope that a program starts out with really should depend on a few factors, and whether or not you have the resources to fix the issues is going to be one of those factors. In fact, it's going to be a very large part of that initial decision. Other factors include the team that you have supporting the program. So if that's an in-house team, making sure that the people on that team have enough time dedicated to the program so that they can respond quickly to any reports that come in. Or on the flip side, choosing to use something like HackerOne's managed triage service to to either handle that stuff or backstop your team, which is something that we did at one point at Zenefits. At this point, by the way, we do everything in-house. But as long as you have those resources and can dedicate the time to making that happen, then the scope can be as wide as you want it to be. Now, if you're really new to the space, I do recommend starting small. It's always easier to expand your scope than it is to try to drag it back in and shrink it down. But again, that really depends on the scope. It depends on the maturity of the security program. the kind of testing that may already have been done. So if you're pretty confident, and for example, and your regular pen tests or assessments are coming back with a clean bill of health, then it might be worth considering a larger scope. So again, it really depends, but generally speaking, I would say start on the smaller side and ramp up from there.
Excellent, and that kind of actually led into the next question, which was about managing incoming bug reports and doing triage. Is that something that you, like, say, for full clarity, do you do it completely in-house? Have you worked with other partners to be able to manage that inflow?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we've worked with a couple of different bug bounty platforms. Not going to name names in this case, but the first one that we went with had a fully managed triage service, 100%. And we actually decided that we wanted more visibility into the reports that were coming in. As a result of that and a few other factors, we ended up switching vendors and went to the HackerOne platform. And as I said, we haven't looked back. So because we did want that visibility, we decided to do all of the triaging in-house. And that's, literally we're handling every single report that comes in. And that's, it's good and bad, of course. It means that we do end up being the front line for any invalid reports or anything that, really doesn't make sense or needs more information. And those are things that could be handled by a third party if we decided to. The way that we structured it was, as I mentioned earlier, we made sure that we could dedicate the time to our program, that we had the internal resources available, both to manage the program and to fix what we were finding. And, and so we were willing to put in the time to do that triage. It also gave us, like I said, a lot of visibility into the program, which was what we were looking for. Now, that said, I will also add that on a couple of occasions, we've actually engaged HackerOne to help us catch up on our new report queue. So on a couple of occasions, we've had times where, for various reasons, whether it was a new feature launch or after one of the epic bug bounty bash events that we put on, we had a lot of reports to sift through and remove duplicates and the whole process. And at that time, we actually decided, just to make sure that we kept the program moving, kept it dynamic, and kept the researchers engaged, that it was worth going to HackerOne and using their triage service to kind of get us up to speed and get us to where we wanted to be in terms of driving our queue down. So it depends on the factors that you're looking for, whether that full transparency is critical, or if it's maybe you have a smaller team. There's different approaches that work for different people, but there's certainly value that we've seen in taking both approaches and experimenting with it a little bit. Realistically, that is something that, for a little while, if you feel like bringing a program in-house, you can do that very easily. Similarly, if you decide to outsource the triage or any other part of it, that's an easy experiment to do too. So the fit is going to depend on the program, the company, and the team, but ultimately there's no right answer for this particular approach.
Right. So now, Mac, my next question is actually my own question, and it's a selfish one because I know you have a particular researcher who's a rock star for your program, and I would love to just have you describe what that feeling is when you get a text or a message from him at 3 a.m. and it's one of those big bugs. Like what are you feeling at that moment, and what do you do next?
Well, that's an excellent question. Actually, that's pretty funny. I guess I could come back with a question for you, which is, which researcher did you have in mind? Because honestly, we've got multiple awesome researchers, but I have a couple of them that I'm thinking of as I'm answering this. And the feeling, well, initially the feeling is I'm really tired if it's 3 a.m. and this is going to be a lot of fun. But the feeling is usually honestly a bit of a sense of relief, because I know that if something's being reported, then it means, you know, we're going to find out about it. We're going to get good details from these researchers. The ones that I'm thinking of in particular have proven themselves time and time again to generate accurate reports with accurate findings, great write-ups that give us exactly what we need. And in a lot of cases, they take it a step further and not only report what the issue is, but actually give us recommendations on the quickest way to fix the issue. And in some cases, if at all possible, depending on the type of issue, they may actually put in the time to kind of backstop us and prevent anybody else from exploiting that issue until we have a chance to fix it. So really, the feeling is totally a sense of relief, and and I'm grateful that they're on our side.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing some of that, and I'm sure for anybody online can reach out, maybe get some of those awesome stories from you after the fact. But you know, you mentioned in the I think it was the final tip, you talked about the special things that you did for some of the researchers, especially at the Bug Bounty Bash. You know, our H1702 hackathon. And typically responsiveness, we find from the hackers that we survey is like top of the list in terms of they want to have that ongoing communication, and you mentioned that as well. You know, how have you kind of approached the responsiveness? And it's a two-part question, I guess. How have you approached the responsiveness as a team? Like, do you have a certain individual that owns it that week? Is it like a rotation, or do you? And then do you have like regular planning sessions to be able to like think about how you can juice the program to be able to get more of those best bugs and incentivize the best researchers?
So to answer the first question, yeah, we set up a rotation that was actually on a weekly cadence. So good call. And the expectation when we were using that system, which I'll explain in a second, the expectation was that any report that came in would be responded to by whoever owned that week within 24 hours. That meant going in, either asking for additional information if we needed it, or starting the process of triaging the report, confirming the issue, and moving it on down the line. Now, recently, actually, since we really ended up driving our new bounties list down to 0, which was awesome. I know inbox 0 is everybody's dream, and we managed to pull it off, I'm proud to say. We've actually been able to move to a little bit more of an ad hoc approach. So rather than have somebody assigned per week, we actually just schedule a couple of meetings during a given week. And anything that has come in that isn't critical, we talk about during those meetings, and we'll review, triage, and so forth. Now, anything that does come in, and this is in part thanks to the Slack integration that we use with our HackerOne feed, along with some other stuff, we do have eyes on every single report that comes in. So if something critical hits our desk, we are right there. We're right on top of it. But at this point, we've actually shifted off of that kind of weekly model and moved to kind of a twice-a-week cadence for meetings. Now, to answer the second question, in terms of how do we keep the program interesting at this point, that's actually a question that I don't have a good answer for at this moment. We continue to participate in the various events that HackerOne does. In fact, the last one, which was the H1415 here in San Francisco, which was awesome. We got to hack at the HackerOne office. It was a blast. We actually came and participated as hackers rather than as the target. So in that way, we were able to sit down and work beside the researchers that have done so much good for us. That was awesome. But moving forward, we are going to, as we work through fixing some of the issues that we found and continue to drive our queue down, we're going to look at expanding our scope and creating out some more interesting and fun ways of keeping everybody engaged. Now, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but based on what we've come up with in the past, I think it's probably going to be pretty epic.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a follow-up webinar that you can come back and chat with us more about how that goes and what you guys do. Um,
Yeah,
just a
totally.
reminder for anybody still left on the line that wants to ask a question, shoot them through the chat box or the question box, and we'll be able to get those over. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling with questions, Mac. I'm gonna take even a little bit more of your time. We've got 10 minutes left, maybe about 5 more minutes of questions. We'll see if any of our listeners have some awesome queries coming. But I actually have kind of a big one, which, your program's a little bit more mature. Say, for instance, you were just getting started today. What do you do? Do you roll out with a private program? How many researchers should you invite? What are some of the steps that when you think of, oh, if I was to start from scratch, what are some of the recommendations that you might be able to provide us?
That's a good question. If I were starting a brand new program today, as I mentioned before, the decisions that I made around it would they would be directly influenced by the maturity of the security model in our company and where we thought our security would be. So if I was rolling out a brand new program at Zenefits where we have a fairly mature security model, I would start with a private program. I always make that recommendation. I've heard some horror stories, to be honest, about programs starting out and going public immediately and getting just absolutely buried under reports, because you never know what the researchers are going to find. Honestly, it's one of those things where once your researchers have time to dig into your platform, they may find stuff that has been missed on the last few pen tests, for example. And if there's a number of those types of issues, that can be enough to keep your team very busy for a while. So I do recommend starting with a private program, and that's exactly what I would do. And at this point, based on our maturity, I would probably throw invites to, say, 40 to 50 hackers. If our program is a little less mature, I might drop that number down. If we were going back to where we were a couple of years ago when we started our program fresh, I would probably invite only about 20, maybe 25 researchers to start out with. That was actually approximately how we started, and we saw excellent results. And then really from there, it's all about scaling. There's actually some cool features that we've absolutely loved that HackerOne introduced to the platform, which among them includes the ability to automatically invite additional researchers if the number of reports starts to slow down. So we have used and abused that feature for all it's worth and grown our program quite a bit as a result now. And so that would be the approach that I would kind of take. Start small, start private, get a good sense of where you are, and then expand out from there.
Great. I'll kind of circle back around to one of the questions that I didn't have time to ask, but you had mentioned security training early on in your presentation. I think this was under the tip number 1 and culture of readiness and awareness. Do you have any specific things like that you did internally? Was this a pretty formal approach, or was it pretty ad hoc and much, part of a bigger picture, right, in terms of the organization security training wise? But did you create the kind of materials and be able to spearhead that internally? Just curious what you guys were able to do there.
Yeah, so for our side of things, we really started with by focusing on new hire orientation and kind of the call it a security indoctrination, if you will. But from day one, getting new developers kind of into the security mindset, and we took the approach of pointing out the types of information that PII and PHI that we have, and discussing some of the kind of common classes of issues that we'd seen in the past, as well as the steps that they could take to address those issues or try to prevent them. We also invited all developers to connect with us anytime they had a question about security, and if they had any questions about the security of code that they were actively working on, we also invited them to connect with us and either mention us on their code pull request, or come see us in person, or whatever they preferred. Hit us up on Slack and take the time to really speak with them about security and kind of get that mentality there. The second part of that, then going on from there, was when we started observing trends that came out of our program. and decided basically to take action on those trends. So there was a lot of data that was actionable and that was useful. So that was the approach that we took. We'd go to individual teams that maybe had a less than stellar track record with a particular issue, and we'd go into those issues and discuss kind of where those issues were coming from, how to avoid them, and just kind of work on sort of, spot training the developers for those issues. And then finally, and this is still an ongoing effort, we actually do have some internal material that we're going to work on pushing out to all the developers and getting them involved. The final step for that, which is also something that I do recommend just across the board, is there are a number of security training courses out there for developers. There's some excellent material around SANS 25, OWASP Top 10, common vulnerability type training that in a lot of cases is actually tailored specifically to the environment or to the language or framework that the developers are using. So anytime that a business has the time and has that security requirement to really do security well and train their developers up and do well by their customers as a result, that's also something that I recommend companies look into.
Yeah, and kudos to you guys at Zenefits for kind of taking the lead in spearheading that training. How everybody knows how important that is. Well, Mack, we're coming to the end of our hour, so we haven't had a next question come in. So I will say, Mack, I get paid to break things, Staples. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the chance to be able to have a brief dialogue as well, ask questions, and loved your presentation. So with that, I will say thank you very, very much. And for all of us, or all of you joining us as well, that concludes our webinar today. Make sure and watch your email for the link with the recording as well as the slides. That'll do it, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mack.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Take care.